The cameras had barely started rolling when it happened. Something so raw, so unfiltered, it sucked the air out of the studio. Bill Meyer, seated comfortably under the harsh lights of his own stage, leaned into his mic with a smirk carved deep across his face and fired the shot that would echo across the internet within seconds. "Senator Kennedy," he said, dragging out the syllables with performative contempt. "Does that southern drawl come with a complimentary horse and buggy, or do you upgrade to a pickup full of conspiracy theories?" Laughter erupted from the studio audience, trained to chuckle on cue. But it was louder this time, almost cruel in its certainty that the senator from Louisiana was the punchline. John Kennedy, sitting just a few feet away in a simple gray suit, didn't blink. He didn't laugh. He didn't frown. He just looked at Bill the way a seasoned woodsman might look at a boy playing with matches. You could feel the tone of the room change. Behind the camera, producers shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't just a joke. It was a jab at heritage, at identity, at the millions of Americans who spoke with that same cadence, who got up at dawn with grit under their nails and worked without applause. Kennedy's fingers gently tapped the armrest, once, twice, as if counting down. And then, with the smooth calm of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to teach, he leaned toward the mic. "Well now," he began, his voice slow and rich with southern molasses. "I'll answer that, son, but I'll do it the way my daddy taught me, with a story, not a slap." The audience tensed, some laughing nervously, others leaning forward. No one had expected him to fire back. Not like that, not with so much control. But the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was electric. Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult. Instead, he painted a picture. "I grew up in a town where your word meant more than your wallet. My neighbor, Mr. Hughes, lost 2 fingers in a cotton gin accident and still showed up to work the next day. He said dignity wasn't in your paycheck, it was in how you showed up when nobody was watching. My daddy didn't go to Harvard, but he taught me to tell the truth, even if it costs you comfort. So you can laugh at my accent, Mr. Mayor. You can mock my boots, my belt buckle, my choice of words. But what I've seen? You can't learn that at HBO. There it was. No rage, no theatrics. Just truth delivered with the kind of calm that slices deeper than any insult." Mayor shifted in his chair, clearly caught off guard. The studio lights suddenly felt too hot. The audience, now split, stopped laughing. A few heads nodded. A young woman in the front row mouthed the word, "Wow." Kennedy wasn't defending himself. He was defending every working-class American who'd ever been made to feel small for not fitting into a coastal mold. And just when it seemed the moment had peaked, Kennedy looked directly into the camera. "Some folks think silence means weakness," he said. "But where I come from, we call it patience. And patience is what lets you outlive every man who thinks volume is the same as virtue." Right then, you could feel it. That shift, that slow, almost cinematic realization that maybe the underdog wasn't the underdog after all. Maybe he was the only adult in the room. If you felt that too, if that moment just hit something deeper in you, I want you to do one simple thing. Scroll down and drop a 9 in the comments. Not for me. For every person who's ever had their voice dismissed just because it didn't sound like it came from a Manhattan studio. Like this video if you think dignity speaks louder than a punchline. Because the story's just beginning, and the next moment is going to change everything. Bill Mayer let out a hollow laugh, the kind that tries to reclaim power after it's been yanked out from under you. "That's cute," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Really, a plus for homespun wisdom. But let's not pretend that Southern charm builds bridges or broadband." His tone was sharper now, more defensive than smug. He leaned back in his chair, trying to reset the narrative, but his timing was off. The audience didn't bite. No chuckles followed. Just the kind of silence that creeps in when the room starts realizing who actually has something to say. Kennedy adjusted his glasses slowly, a small smile forming. Not out of pride, but purpose. He looked at Bill like a teacher waiting for a student to realize they've just answered their own question wrong. "I'm glad you brought up bridges," Kennedy replied, voice smooth as a riverbank. "Let me tell you about one." The studio dimmed emotionally, leaning into his tempo. "Down in Lafourche Parish, we had a bridge that connected two parts of town. One side poor, one side poorer. It wasn't much to look at. Rusted rails, wood that creaked when trucks passed. But it mattered. Every morning at 5, Old Man Tucker drove his truck across it. No job title, no degree, but he delivered hot meals to folks who couldn't leave home. Never asked for a thing. When the bridge collapsed one winter, they said it wasn't worth fixing. Too small, too forgotten. You know what Tucker did?" He paused. "He rowed a boat across that damn bayou every morning, said the folks on the other side still got to eat." The audience didn't just listen. They felt it. This wasn't nostalgia, it was character. And for a moment, even the camera crew stopped checking their monitors. Maher tried to speak, but Kennedy held up a hand. Gently, without force. It wasn't dominance. It was invitation. You think wisdom only speaks in $10 words and tech jargon, but what you forget is that the heart doesn't speak in algorithms. Then he leaned in just slightly, eyes calm but cutting. "There's more decency in a single act of selfless work than in 1,000 perfectly crafted monologues." Maher's jaw tightened. He tried to joke again, something about folk tales from flyover country, but it fell flat. No applause sign could fix the shift that had already happened. Instead, Kennedy pulled something from his jacket pocket. A folded, worn photo. He held it up. "This is Marcus. Grew up 2 streets down from me. Never made it past 11th grade. Could fix anything with a wrench and a prayer. One night on the rig, gas leak hit. Everyone ran except Marcus. He stayed. Shut the valve with a torn glove and a prayer. Saved 12 men. He died doing it. You know what the news called him?" Kennedy's voice caught for the first time. Not from weakness, but reverence. "An accident?" He looked directly at Bill. "But to us, he was a hero." The air in the room felt heavier. Maher's usual quick wit faded, replaced by a stiff posture and forced grin. This wasn't the kind of segment he could spin into a viral soundbite. He was in too deep. And Kennedy? He wasn't done. "You talk about broadband and bridges like they only come from Washington or Wall Street. But where I'm from, we built our own bridges. Between neighbors, between generations, between what's right and what's easy. So when you call my voice outdated, what you're really saying is that everything it carries, sacrifice, loyalty, grit, doesn't belong anymore. And that, Mr. Maher, is a hell of a thing to say on national television." The crowd stirred, slowly at first, then steadily, applause rising not in bursts, but in a wave of respect. Kennedy didn't raise his hands or stand. He just nodded once, folding the photo back into his coat, like a man laying down a truth no one could contest. Maher swallowed hard, the cameras catching the exact moment his smirk cracked into uncertainty. And at home, across the country, millions paused. Not because they agreed or disagreed, but because something about that moment felt bigger than the stage, bigger than the show. Something real had walked into the room, and it had a southern accent. And just when you think it can't go deeper, trust me, it does. What Kennedy says next doesn't just flip the room, it flips the story. If you're still with us, if you're feeling that twist in your chest right now, go ahead and comment 9 below, so we know you're here for the heart, not just the headline. Like this video if you're ready for what comes next, because Bill Maher's undoing is only getting started. Bill Maher shifted in his seat again, this time not out of theatrical flourish, but quiet discomfort. The studio, once echoing with easy laughter, now felt dense with something unfamiliar to his stage. Humility. But true to his instincts, he wasn't ready to surrender. "Okay," he said, voice a bit thinner than before. "We've had our Southern campfire moment, but this is still the real world. You can't fix broken systems with cowboy stories and old photos." He leaned forward, trying to reclaim authority with a tone soaked in cynicism. "Nostalgia isn't a policy, Senator. It's a coping mechanism." Kennedy didn't flinch. He simply folded his hands together, slow and deliberate, like a pastor preparing to deliver a sermon that wasn't meant to preach, but to pierce. "You know, Bill," he said gently, "I never once said I could fix a broken system with stories, but I damn sure know that mocking the people who built it won't get us anywhere either." His words didn't rise. They sank deep. "You call it nostalgia. I call it remembering who got their hands dirty when nobody else would." Bill opened his mouth to respond, but Kennedy was already moving, not physically, but rhetorically, shifting the ground beneath them. "Let me ask you something," he said, voice now steady like an old radio tuned perfectly clear. "Have you ever had someone look you in the eye and say, 'I can't read, but I can fix your house in half the time it would take you to Google how?' Have you ever stood in a room where folks say, 'Yes, sir,' not out of fear, but respect, because respect was the only inheritance they had to give?" Maher blinked, the words catching him off guard. "That's a nice speech," he muttered, "but it's not an argument." Kennedy smiled, not smugly, but with the kind of calm that made everyone else in the room feel suddenly overdressed in ego. "It's not a speech, Bill. It's a mirror. And you don't like what you're seeing." That hit harder than any soundbite of the night. It wasn't a zinger. It was a revelation. One that stripped the glamour off Maher's sarcasm and left only the hollow space behind it. The audience shifted audibly, shoulders straightening, phones dropping from hands, silence thickening once again. In the control room, producers exchanged looks. One of them whispered, "We're losing him," referring not to Kennedy but to Maher. Sensing the unraveling, Maher tried one last pivot. "All right, Senator, since we're sharing morality tales, answer me this. What's your solution? Because grit and gumption don't power a nation. Infrastructure does. Innovation does. Intelligence does." His voice cracked slightly on that last word. Kennedy tilted his head, like a judge considering a final argument, then said slowly, "You think intelligence lives in the places with the tallest buildings. I've seen more brilliance in the back of a tractor than I have in some boardrooms. You want a solution? Stop assuming America only exists in the places where people talk fast and feel smarter because of it. If you want to move forward, you better learn to bring everyone with you, including the ones whose hands are calloused and whose voices don't trend on Twitter." The audience erupted, not in staged clapping, but in something closer to relief. A slow, rising wave of applause mixed with audible, "Yes," and even a few gasps. The people watching knew exactly what they were witnessing. Not a politician winning a debate, but a man restoring dignity where it had been carelessly mocked. For the first time all night, Maher sat back, quiet. Not because he agreed, but because he had nothing left to deflect with. He had stepped into the ring expecting a caricature, and found a living contradiction instead. A man both gentle and sharp, kind and unyielding, Southern, but never small. And Kennedy wasn't done. "You know what's funny, Bill?" he said, tone soft but surgical. "I came here thinking this would be a conversation, but I realized about 10 minutes in that you didn't invite me here to talk. You invited me here to be talked down to be the punchline. But here's the twist." He leaned forward just slightly, voice lowering like thunder before the storm. "When you try to humiliate a man for where he comes from, You only expose where you've never been. The air was gone from the room. Just stunned faces. Meyer opened his mouth, then closed it again. And that moment, that precise moment, was captured, clipped, and sent rocketing across the internet. A tweet went viral within minutes. John Kennedy didn't just win the debate, he changed the conversation. Another followed. Bill Maher brought sarcasm. Kennedy brought soul. And if you're watching this thinking, that was the moment everything turned, you're absolutely right. But what happens next takes it to a whole new level. Because what Kennedy does after this, on camera, in front of everyone, is the part no one expected. If you're ready to see a public fall from grace that's not just awkward, but epic, stick with me. Like this if you believe humility still matters. And if you felt that turn in your gut, drop a 9 in the comments, because the best is still coming. The silence lingered like smoke after a house fire. Thick, slow, impossible to ignore. Bill Maher sat rigid, blinking hard, searching his mind for a witty comeback, a pivot, a way to claw back the control he was so used to owning on his stage. But none came. His lips parted slightly, as if a response was coming, then closed again, like a door gently shutting on a man who'd just realized he locked himself out of his own house. The studio had shifted. This was no longer his territory. The rules had changed. The crowd felt it. The producers felt it. America, watching from millions of glowing screens, felt it too. Then came the moment that would seal the night, not just as a debate, but as a cultural turning point. Senator Kennedy turned not to Bill, but to the audience. Not just those seated in the room, but those beyond the cameras. His voice, low and deliberate, carried with it the steadiness of a man who had nothing to sell and everything to remind. "Let me tell y'all something you may not expect to hear on a show like this," he said, his southern drawl now a banner, not a burden. "I don't hate Bill, not even a little. In fact, I appreciate him for giving me the chance to remind folks watching that you don't have to speak fast to speak truth." He stood up. Slow, steady, no fanfare. Then, to the shock of everyone in the studio, he walked over to the front of the stage. Not to storm off, not to confront, but to reach into his coat and pull out something unexpected. A small, folded American flag patch. Faded. Torn at the corners. "This," he said, holding it gently, "belonged to my brother. He carried it through 2 tours. He came home with a limp and a quiet smile, and he never once asked for applause. He just wanted folks to treat each other better than they had yesterday." The camera zoomed in instinctively. Kennedy's hand trembled just slightly, but his voice held firm. "I keep it in my pocket every time I walk into places like this. Places where people laugh at things they don't understand, dismiss voices that don't sound like their own, and confuse cleverness with wisdom. This flag has heard silence louder than your applause, Bill, and still it waves." The audience rose to their feet, slowly at first, then in waves. No one had called for applause. It simply happened. Applause without irony, without prompts, without guilt, just raw, honest resonance, the kind that doesn't come from clever scripting, but from witnessing a moment you know you'll remember for the rest of your life. Maher, still seated, looked up, his face frozen in that space between embarrassment and revelation. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before. "That's heavy, Senator," he said, attempting to smile but failing to reach his own eyes. "Maybe I misjudged you." Kennedy turned to face him, calm as ever. "No, Bill," he said kindly. "You didn't misjudge me. You just forgot something real simple. People don't come from punchlines. They come from places, and places have stories. Not all of them shiny, not all of them clean, but every one of them worth listening to." That was it. The kill shot wasn't loud. It wasn't even angry. It was respectful, and that's what made it lethal. Because when the insulted man chooses grace over vengeance, it's not just humbling, it's disarming. And Bill Maher, for all his years of verbal warfare, had no defense for that kind of dignity. Backstage, Maher's team scrambled. A producer leaned into his headset and whispered, "We're bleeding support." Comment sections flipping. On social media, the transformation was already complete. Kennedy Class was trending. Clips of the flag, of the story about Marcus, of the line, "You just forgot something real simple," were being reposted with captions like, "That's the America we need." Meanwhile, Kennedy remained where he was, unmoved by the applause, unshaken by the noise. He simply placed the flag patch back into his coat pocket and sat down, his hands folded, his face serene. The camera caught Mayer glancing at him, a man who had just realized the episode wasn't about views or ratings anymore. It had become something he couldn't control, something sacred. And here's the part no one could have predicted. After the show ended and the credits began to roll, with half the audience still standing, Senator Kennedy walked over to Mayer, not to gloat, not to grandstand, but to extend his hand. Bill hesitated, then slowly reached out. Their hands met. Not as equals in rhetoric, but as men realizing, perhaps for the first time, what real power looked like. What happens after that handshake will leave the internet in pieces. Trust me, you're going to want to see it. But before we go there, I want to know what you think. Was this grace or strategy? Was this dignity or a mic drop disguised as humility? Drop a 9 in the comments if you believe respect still means something in today's world. And hit like if that handshake made you feel something real. Because the next chapter? It's going to change everything. What happened after the handshake wasn't planned, wasn't staged, and certainly wasn't something anyone on Maher's production team had expected. As the credits rolled and the audience began gathering their coats in stunned silence, a soft voice came from the crowd. A young man, maybe early 20s, standing in the third row. "Senator," he called out, not shouting, just speaking with a kind of trembling honesty. "My dad talks like you. He thought people like him didn't matter anymore. Tonight, I'm going to tell him he's wrong." The words didn't echo. They landed. Deep. Kennedy looked up, his face softening even more than before. He gave the young man a slow, deliberate nod, the kind you remember long after the lights go down. Mayer turned slightly, hearing it too, but instead of jumping in, he stood still, arms crossed, face unreadable. And that's when it happened. A stagehand, barely visible to the audience, approached Kennedy off to the side, offering him a bottle of water. Kennedy smiled, accepted it, and with a grateful nod said, "Thank you, son. Appreciate you." The camera crew, still rolling B-roll, caught that small moment. No fanfare, no audience clapping. Just one man treating another with respect. It was such a contrast from what the show had started as, a verbal cage match designed for viral punches, that even Mayer's staff paused in their tracks. The footage would be uploaded online within the hour, and it would go viral for all the reasons no one had intended. A comment beneath the clip would sum it up best. Kennedy didn't win with words. He won with presence. Back inside the studio, Mayer broke his silence. "You know, Senator," he said, quieter now, his voice almost stripped bare, "I built a career on skepticism, on sarcasm. I never thought someone could outmaneuver me by just being still." He chuckled, this time not sarcastically, but like a man confronting something uncomfortable in himself. "But you did." Kennedy nodded, not with pride, but with humility. "Skepticism's not a sin, Bill," he said calmly. "But sometimes we confuse skepticism with superiority. And once we do that, we stop listening." The room stilled again. Maher looked at him. This time not as a target, not as a stereotype, but maybe, just maybe, as a mirror. "You think I've stopped listening?" he asked, almost to himself. Kennedy didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out at the remaining audience, then back at Meyer. "I think a lot of us have. Not just you." Then came a pause, perfectly timed. "But listening can start again, right now. That part's up to you." It wasn't a jab. It wasn't even a challenge. It was an invitation, the kind that lingers in the heart longer than applause ever could. The audience felt it. The crew felt it. And for the first time in years, perhaps, Bill Maher felt it too. Later that night, clips of the exchange flooded social media, not the clash, but the calm. Not the debate, but the grace that came after it. Hashtags began trending. # Kennedy Grace, # Real Respect, # Listening Starts Now. Comment sections lit up not with anger, but with something far rarer: introspection. One viewer wrote, "I came here for blood, but I stayed for the lesson. Maybe we've all been shouting too long." Another, "Kennedy didn't just represent the South tonight. He represented what it looks like when an adult walks into the room." News outlets picked it up within hours. "The Kennedy moment," some called it. "The Southern stillness," said others. But the headlines missed something deeper. This wasn't just about Kennedy. It wasn't even just about Meyer. It was about the hunger we all feel. For dignity, for decency, for someone who doesn't scream to be heard. And that's when Kennedy posted something on his own page. A simple photo of the flag patch, sitting on a table next to a worn leather Bible. The caption read, "Truth doesn't need a microphone. It just needs a spine." That post alone reached over 10 million views in under 24 hours. If you've been watching this unfold, you know by now this wasn't just a debate. It was a reckoning, the clash of two cultures, two tones, two entire worldviews. And yet somehow it ended not with humiliation, but revelation. But don't think the story ends here. Because while Kennedy may have walked away with the audience's respect, what happens when he leaves the building and who's waiting for him outside will take everything you think you know and turn it on its head. The final chapter is coming. And trust me, it's not what you expect. If you're still with us, still feeling this shift in your chest like a breath of something long overdue, drop a 9 in the comments. Like this if you believe respect isn't old-fashioned, it's just been waiting for the right voice to remind us. Because in the last part of this story, we find out what happens when dignity meets the next generation face to face. And the result? It might just change everything. As the studio lights dimmed and the last crew member called wrap, Senator John Kennedy stepped out into the cool night air behind the building. No security detail, no entourage, just a tired man with a folded flag in his pocket and the weight of 1,000 eyes still lingering on his shoulders. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for one figure standing near the back, hands stuffed in the pockets of a gray hoodie, head down, waiting like someone who hadn't quite decided whether to walk away or say something life-changing. Kennedy didn't notice him at first. He paused, breathing in the silence, letting the adrenaline bleed off slowly. Then the voice came. Not loud, not sure, but heavy, with something unspoken. "Senator Kennedy?" He turned. The young man was maybe 25, maybe younger, wearing jeans that had seen better days and shoes that didn't quite fit. His voice cracked as he stepped forward. "I watched everything. From out here. They wouldn't let me in. I didn't have a ticket, but I couldn't leave." Kennedy nodded. "You don't need a ticket to listen, son. Just ears and a heart." The kid chuckled once, nervously. I don't know where I fit. My dad's a mechanic. Voted the same way his whole life. My sister's an activist in the city. Thinks people like us are the problem. I guess I've spent most of my life feeling like I'm stuck in the middle of a fight I didn't start." He paused, eyes searching Kennedy's. But tonight, when you talked about listening, I don't know, man. It made me think maybe there's a place for people like me. Kennedy took a slow step forward, studying him not with judgment but deep understanding. What's your name, son? Tyler. Well, Tyler, he said, placing a hand gently on the young man's shoulder. You're not in the middle. You're right where the future begins. People like you, who've seen both sides and still believe in decency, that's where hope lives. Not in the shouting, not in the viral clips, in quiet decisions like this, showing up, staying to listen. Tyler swallowed hard, tears brimming but not falling. I didn't think a man in a suit would ever say that to me. Kennedy smiled, a little tired but more genuine than ever. Then I'm glad I wore one. They stood there in silence for a moment. 2 generations, 2 stories intersecting not in politics, not in headlines, but in shared humanity. Then Kennedy did something unexpected. He reached into his coat and pulled out the patch, the worn American flag his brother had carried. He looked at it for a long moment, then gently pressed it into Tyler's palm. I want you to keep this, he said softly. Not because of what it is, but because of what it means. It's not about war or speeches or even patriotism. It's about carrying something that matters when the world tells you it doesn't. Tyler shook his head, overwhelmed. I can't take that. Yes, you can, Kennedy replied, because you just proved you're ready to carry more than most. That moment, captured by a single lingering photographer from the network still packing up, would become the image that defined the aftermath. Not the insults, not the debate, but the handoff, the passing of something sacred from one generation to the next, not in words, but in gesture. Online, the photo spread like wildfire. No caption necessary, just the image of a tired senator handing something small but profound to a young man who had finally felt seen. Comments poured in by the millions. This is what leadership looks like. This is how we heal. I didn't cry during the debate, but I cried at this. By sunrise, news anchors were calling it the moment America paused. But to Kennedy, it was never about spectacle. It was about Tyler. It was about Marcus. It was about Mr. Hughes and Old Man Tucker. It was about reminding people that character has no trending cycle, and that decency, though quiet, never disappears. And now, if you've followed this story from the start, you understand something deeper. This wasn't a takedown. It wasn't a victory lap. It was a reckoning, a reminder that in a world spinning faster than most of us can hold on to, the strongest thing a person can do is stand still, listen close, and speak truth with kindness. If that meant something to you, if it stirred something real, drop a 9 in the comments so we know you're still here, still hoping, still ready to carry what matters, because respect isn't old-fashioned. It's the future we forgot we needed. And now that we remember, it's time to rebuild it, together.